Hello, friends. When I was 10 years old, my family headed out to Newberg, Oregon from Rock Springs, Wyoming to go to chalk art camp with a man named Herschel Thornburg. Some of you may remember that name. I can still remember the first lesson of any chalk art picture that you might create. The very first step is to make a mess. It's to scribble. You have to cover the entire piece of paper in white chalk. You can't see it very well. You hardly know that it's there until you start working with the picture. It is that white background that makes the rest of the picture dynamic. Your first color down on the paper sticks and makes it possible to blend all of the subsequent colors that are added on top. So it makes it possible to create layers of colors. And it's fun to watch people who are really good at the color blending. I remember Herschel telling us that the most common mistake that his students would make was forgetting to make a mess, forgetting to scribble. They'd forget to cover their picture in white chalk. And when you do that, it results in a very dull and boring picture. The blue is straight blue, the green is straight green. There's no creation of new colors. All of the color lines have to be drawn kind of rigidly. There's no melting, no reflecting of colors. Starting out with a mess enables the artist not only to use the chalk, but to use their fingertips. You can pull the yellow of a sun ray down across the mountain range. But there is a downside to all of this. There's a downside to the white background. It means that your entire picture is easily changed. It's easily messed up. So if you would accidentally sneeze, it might look like your sunset exploded. Or if you accidentally brush your hand against a tree that you just drew, it immediately smears your tree across the meadow. That functions as a decent metaphor for the world that we live in. Eugene Peterson says mess is the precondition of creativity. Every creative enterprise is full of risk, and plenty of creative projects end up in frustration, false starts, embarrassments, smudges, smears, and failures. But that's how beauty is produced. To be a creator means that you have to be able to tolerate a certain amount of messiness. Before you turn your project into something of beauty, order, function, you have to be willing to engage the first step, which is make a mess. So, interestingly enough, that's how the Bible starts out. The story of the Bible starts out in Genesis. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Now the earth was formless, formless and empty. That word formless, tohu, is chaos, disorder, confusion, mess, unreality, primeval. So do you catch that? The first word of the creation of the earth is chaos, disorder, mess. Mess is the precondition of creativity. The first 3 days of the creation account, the first creation account in Genesis, show God bringing order to the chaos. So light and darkness are separated, water and sky are separated, water and dry ground are separated, seas and land. And for the first time, God sees that the picture is starting to look good. When God finishes his creation project, he had not created a finished product. Rather, he had created something capable of becoming something more, because he had created co-creators, co-artists. God had created a planet that he actually invited to be co-participant in creation. God says, let the earth bring forth vegetation. He had created all kinds of wild animals and humans, co-creators, who were invited into the unfinished project to cultivate the land, to help it become something more than what it was, to steward the land, to rule over creation with him. Now, God could have created a world without any chaos, without any wildness, a world with no color blending, a world with straight lines, a world where humans and angels all obeyed him, a world where humans functioned more like puppets, automatons, never making a mistake, nothing out of place, nothing out of order, no surprises, no growth, no change, no improvements needed. But it seems that would be dull and stagnant, too predictable to God, because that's not what we have. God created a world where God often doesn't get his way, a world with enough chaos and possibility in the background that within just a few pages of the Bible, when you start reading the book of Genesis, it's like the entire project has gotten so smudged that God regrets ever creating humanity. That's the story of Noah. Sometimes when bad things happen, people treat God like God was treating the world like a paint by number painting. That's the way they think about God, as if God always gets God's way. Like whatever happened was something that God designed and God planned. And then they say, really? Was this the plan? But from the very first pages of the Bible, we see that God created a world charged with possibilities, and that included the possibility that God might not get God's way. There are forces in the universe other than God's will that affect what ends up happening. So throughout the Bible, we find God lamenting. Last week, we looked at Job lamenting as a representative of all of us being able to lament to God, but we also find God lamenting. We aren't the only ones who ask why and how long. God asks those questions over and over in Scripture. God is wounded by the decisions we make. God can't make sense of why his children would do what they do. And like this first example, God says, I thought after she's done all this, she'll return to me. But she did not return. He's talking about his people there. God involves people in his decisions. Abraham, Moses, the prophets. God seeks every conceivable means of keeping his relationship with his people intact. And God asks this question that so many parents ask: what am I going to do with you? Bible scholar Terence Fretheim points out that the Bible records 40 different times that God changes his mind. It's called divine repentance or course changes. Um, and I think about those smudges on the chalk art picture, and you bump a tree, or a tree gets bumped somehow, and you say, "Oh, I'm going to do something a little different here." God starts the picture with the white chalk of chaos, disorder. And that chaos was never wiped away, but neither were the forces of chaos allowed to run free. God created a world that was dynamic, a world that could easily get smudged. And so, yes, God sets limits on nature and humans and angels, but that doesn't mean that God's world is a paint by number picture with no color blending. God's art project keeps getting smudged, which means God is constantly pivoting. Mess is the precondition of creativity. Okay, so what's this have to do with the book of Job? Well, Job starts out at the center of a highly ordered world. He is the greatest man in all the land. He's surrounded by family and friends and his farm. He's out on the margins of Job's world. There's already suffering that's going on. The poor and the powerless are already oppressed. People are already unjustly dying. The wilderness and natural disasters devour people's lives. Chaos destroys. But there's no mention of that at the beginning of the book. because none of that is touching Job at the beginning. But then Job's life unravels. He descends into chaos. Natural disasters ruin his life. Hurricane force winds, lightning, storm, disease. And we can say, wait, I thought the prologue told us Satan is behind that. Uh, Fair enough. But if you look at it from Job's perspective, Job says, I have no rest, but only turmoil. That's a Job chapter 3, like one of his first assessments. Turmoil, this chaos word. Job wants to die. He wants creation to fall back in on itself. And Job finds himself out on the margins of his world. I've become a brother of jackals, a companion of owls. He's out in the God-forsaken wilderness. Job's children were killed by a windstorm. And Job has said, he's been asking God, I want a hearing. But he has said, even if I summon God and he responds, I don't believe he would give me a hearing. He would crush me with a storm and multiply my wounds for no reason. But now it's like God responds according to Job's accusation. God responds, answers out of a storm. And God basically gives Job a tour of the universe, asking Job if he was there when he created it all. Does Job understand the inner workings? Does Job think he can run the universe for a day? Like, Job, have you ever given orders to the morning? Was Job there when God set the limits for the wild sea, saying, this far you may come and no farther, here's where your proud waves halt? Does Job think he could grab the earth by the edges and shake it out like a rug, shaking the wicked out of it? Does Job understand all of the weather patterns and what weather patterns are necessary for the planet to function? Do you send the lightning bolts on their way? Do they report to you? Here we are. Does Job understand the laws of the heavens, gravity, the razor's edge of precision that it takes for the universe to even exist? Does Job understand the inner workings of the animal kingdom in all of its wildness? Like, does Job know how long it takes for a doe to gestate and give birth, or where the mountain goats give birth? And God goes on with example after example of wild animals that refuse to be subdued, animals that are dangerous. And when God finishes with all of these questions, he says to Job, will the one who contends with the Almighty correct him? Let him who accuses God answer him. So, for 39 chapters, Job has been arguing, well, outside of the prologue, Job has been arguing that God is unjust. He's been asking for a hearing. And now, finally, I guess it's 38. It's for 38 chapters, Job has been doing that. And now, finally, God is responding. And the response and the accusation may not seem to line up. Like, Job has been saying, why am I suffering like this? This is unjust suffering. But it doesn't feel like God offers much of a response, because Job wants to talk about his life and why this is happening, and God is talking about the nature of the universe, what kind of a world this is. Peter Enns compares this interaction between God and Job to a teenager asking their dad, what in the world did I do to get grounded, Dad? I didn't do anything wrong. Why am I grounded? I have no idea. And Dad responds, do you go to work every day? Do you pay the bills? Do you keep the lights on? Where were you when I married your mother and bought our first house? The, the Hebrew translation of Job's response to God, if you look at Job chapter 40, is vague, ambiguous. A fair reading could say, well, I'm unworthy. How can I reply to you? I put my hand over my mouth. I spoke once, but I have no answer. Twice, but I'll say no more. That would be like, well, Dad, you're better than me. I'm sorry to question you. I'm grounded. It doesn't matter why. But you could read it another way. So it could go, I'm of small account. What shall I answer you? I lay my hand over my lips. I spoke once, but I'm receiving no answer. Twice, but I will proceed no further. So that is closer to the teenager saying, Dad, How can I argue with you? You call the shots. I'm just going to stop talking now because you're not addressing my questions. So it's saying close to the same thing, but there's a very different message behind it. So when God comes back for round two in Job chapter 40, he says, brace yourself like a man, Job, and I will question you. And then God asks, would you discredit my justice? Job has been saying that God is unjust, not only with him, but with people across the planet. And in response, God brings up these animals that we've never heard of before, Behemoth and Leviathan. So we'll look at Behemoth today. Behemoth and Leviathan had all kinds of symbolism in the religions of the ancient world. Behemoth was a throwback to the chaos monsters of the religions of the day. So some scholars link Behemoth with the Canaanite god Mot, others with the Egyptian god Seth, others with the Ugaritic god Ars or Elskaf Atik. These are chaos monsters, sometimes depicted as the sea or the waters. Now, you remember what Genesis told us about the first word of the creation of the earth, that the earth was formless, chaos, disorder, mess, the white chalk. So I'm going to read the word behemoth as it is written here in Job 40 for you, but try plugging that word chaos in where you see the word behemoth. Try imagining that's what we're talking about here. That's what God's talking about. So now think of behemoth, says God, which I made along with you. He devours growing things like the ox. What strength he has in his loins, what power in his stomach muscles. His tail sways like a cedar. The sinews of his thighs are tightly knit. His vertebrae are bronze tubing, his bones as hard as hammered iron. He's the masterpiece of all God's work, but his maker threatened him with the sword, forbidding him the mountain regions where all the wild beasts have their playground. So he lies beneath the lotus and hides among the reeds in the swamps. The leaves of the lotus give him shade. The willows by the stream shelter him. Should the river overflow on him? Why should he worry? A Jordan could pour down his throat without his caring. So who's going to catch him by the eyes or drive a peg through his nostrils? Now, some people think that God is describing a hippopotamus here. Seems kind of silly at best. George Bernard Shaw sums it up well by saying, so when challenged about his justice, God needs to do better than retort, well, you can't make a hippopotamus, can you? God's first speech in Job 38 and 39 was already about animals, a lot of it. So is God really just dragging Job along on a longer tour of the zoo? Like, Job, well, here's some animals you don't know about, Behemoth and Leviathan. Now, this is not to say that possibly Behemoth is not representative of a hippo as symbolism for something more. Kind of, I think about the way that First Nations think of the eagle as a symbolic animal. So God describes Behemoth as an animal that God can overcome, but humans cannot. The problem with calling Behemoth just a hippo alone, is that we have ancient Egyptian records of hippo hunting and capturing. So if it's a hippo, Job can say, well, God, I know of people who hunt and capture hippos. I'm not impressed. God is using Behemoth as this ancient symbol of chaos, the white chalk, the first rule of creators. Mess is the precondition of creativity. See, Job has accused God of being unjust, not only with him, but with the suffering people across the planet. Think about how many people experience life as chaos. That's why God's responding with chaos. They experience life as chance, as arbitrary. Like a contractor slips on a loose shingle and falls off the roof to his death. Or think about the fires in Oregon this last fall. Like they burned some homes to the ground along with the people who were fleeing, but then the fire jumps and it leaves another home just completely standing unsinged. It seems arbitrary. one person steps a foot to the left and they miss some kind of an accident. They miss being killed by mere inches, while another person takes a step to the right in a different scenario, steps on a loose boulder, and plummets to their death. Ecclesiastes chapter 9 says it this way. It says, "Again I saw that under the sun the race is not to the swift, nor the battle to the strong, nor bread to the wise, nor riches to the intelligent, nor favor to the skillful, but time and chance happen to them all. For no one can anticipate the time of disaster. Like fish taken in a cruel net, and like birds caught in a snare, so mortals are snared at a time of calamity when it suddenly falls upon them." Time and chance happen. It's chaos. And the way we experience disasters is that we want to scream, "This isn't fair." That's what it feels like to people. They very quickly accuse God of being unjust. God, how could you allow my calamity? Like, was this the plan? Now, if we think we live in a paint by number world where God always gets his way, then it merges good and evil into like almost the same picture. And no matter what kind of injustice or suffering I encounter, I'm going to say, well, God must have planned it. And and ultimately, then I say, well, God, how could this be your best plan for my life? And it leads a lot of people to say things like, God isn't good or God isn't God. But how is God responding in the book of Job? Well, God is saying, look at how I created the universe with behemoth, with chaos as part of my masterpiece. I have not eliminated chaos. I don't micromanage the universe. I've set limits for chaos. So God lets creation be what creation is created to be, which means the world is not free of risk. It's a dangerous place. God has brought some amount of order to the chaos, but it's not a paint by number world where everything is predetermined. God doesn't micromanage the sea. God lets the sea be what the sea is. So it can be dangerous. It can make boats feel very small, smash them to bits, never to be found again. Every year on the Oregon coast, sneaker waves and riptides drag small children and their parents out and drown them. But we know the sea is also good. Everyone who lives at the ocean knows this. God says he fixed limits for it and said, "This far you may come, and no farther. Here's where your proud waves halt." The chaos is a part of the beauty. And God says he speaks very similarly in Job 40 about the devouring powers of Behemoth. Behemoth is, he says, the masterpiece of all God's work, but his maker threatened him with the sword, forbidding him the mountain regions, like, "This far you may come, but no farther," where all the beasts have their playground. So Behemoth lies beneath the lotus, hides among the reeds in the swamps. God asked Job earlier, "Do you know the laws of the heavens?" Is Job 38. Like, can you bind the chains of Pleiades, Orion's belt, the bear with the cubs, all these constellations of stars? Physicist Stephen Hawking writes about the Big Bang, the laws of the heavens. He says, if the rate of expansion 1 second after the Big Bang had been smaller by even one part in 1,000,000,000, 100,000,000,000 million, so 100,000 million million, the universe would have recollapsed before it ever reached its present size. But on the other hand, if the rate of expansion had been greater by even one part in a million, stars and planets would not have been able to form. So talk about the universe resting on this knife edge of improbability. That tells you this place is highly ordered. And yet, those same laws of the heavens, gravitational forces that make all of life possible, cause all kinds of tragic deaths. Plane crashes, people fall off ladders, they fall off cliffs, avalanches, mudslides. You could blame gravity for a lot of deaths. The same water that is dense enough to quench your thirst, it's been pointed out, to hydrate you, is dense enough to drown you. The same fire that we use to warm our homes and cook our food and drive our cars also burned up thousands of acres this past year. homes, trees, people. Cells, they have this incredible ability to adapt and change. And that same thing that makes them able to adapt and heal and grow and change also enables them to become cancerous and grow tumors. The same weather patterns that bring us the rain that we so desperately need also cause natural disasters, floods, tornadoes, lightning, blizzards, hurricanes. The same things that make life possible on planet Earth also make death possible. Order and chaos. So, is there a morality to, to gravity or water or weather patterns? God created a world with possibilities, choices. It's the kind of world that God wanted. God willed the possibility of humans and angels to turn against him, and that's love. Love requires free choice. God willed the possibility. But it's been pointed out, willing the possibility doesn't mean God willed the actuality of these things, sin, evil, natural disasters. God only willed the possibility. You know, if you cover your picture in white chalk, you know there's a possibility that this thing could get smudged. This picture could be so smudged. Have you ever heard what mathematicians call chaos theory? Those of you who are good at math and physics will know much more about this than me. So I'm relying on many minds much smarter than my own. Greg Boyd is really good at this. Basically, chaos theory says that the slightest variation in a complex process can cause remarkable variations in that process at another point. So it's been called the butterfly effect, where a butterfly flaps its wings on one side of the planet, and that becomes the variable because everything affects something. So chaos theory says that little butterfly wing flap becomes the variable that ultimately brings out a hurricane on the other side of the planet months later. It's every decision, every action has a ripple effect in the universe, and all the ripple effects are interacting with one another. And sometimes we don't know the long-term effect of any decision that we make. So we might do something that we thought was completely inconsequential, but it ends up having long-term consequences. In a world where God allows free choice to both humans and angels, there are a ton of variables. So when a tragedy happens and we want to know why did this happen, we would have to understand the history of the entire universe to really grasp, to understand all the variables that are at play in that event. So if any human or any animal or any angel or force of nature did anything in a slightly different way, we might not have the same result that we have right now. And so this is the world that God is working with, a world full of choices and full of possibilities, a world that is good and wild and ordered and disordered. And God is saying to Job with Behemoth, like, can you properly limit and capture Behemoth chaos? Can you handle painting the picture with chaos without smudging things? Maybe you would do a better job working with this many variables, Job. And maybe you would do a better job working with the wicked choices that humans and angels make, the forces of evil. Now, this alone doesn't free us of the pain of loss or the trauma of suffering, but it frees us to look at the picture differently. Yeah, our life gets smudged, it gets smeared. The picture looks like a complete disaster. But what if God is not directly behind those smudges? What if God is still working with the complexity of those smudges to ultimately draw a picture that is beautiful? Rather than using coercive power that revokes free will to make the world right, God uses self-sacrificing power to make the world right. So the entire Bible anticipates a world that will be renewed and remade, a world where the beauty that God intended will finally be seen, an art piece where the mess of chaos is finally brought to reveal the beauty that God desired from the beginning, which is love. So Romans 8 says it this way: creation waits in eager expectation for the children of God to be revealed. The whole creation has been groaning as in the pains of childbirth right up to the present time. Isaiah says it this way: in that day the wolf and the lamb will live together, the leopard will lie down with the baby goat, the calf and the yearling will be safe with the lion, a little child will lead them all. The cow will graze near the bear, the cub and the calf will lie down together, the lion will eat hay like a cow, the baby will play safely near the hole of a cobra. Yes, a little child will put its hand in a nest of deadly snakes without harm. Nothing will hurt or destroy in all my holy mountain. For as the waters fill the sea, so the earth will be filled with people who know the Lord. And the book of Revelation, the Apostle John says it this way: then I saw a new heaven and a new earth. I heard a loud shout from the throne saying, look, God's home is now among his people. He'll live with them. They'll be his people. God will be with them. He'll wipe every tear from their eyes. There will be no more death, sorrow, crying, or pain. All these things are gone forever.